Not really sure on how to begin this, and my data may make more sense after reading my experience. I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. Back in summer of 2004, my family was supposed to go vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was coming up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mom wanted to drive up. It was super annoying to me at the time, but my siblings and I didn't have a choice, so we loaded into the car and started the drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was uneventful, but there were various delays and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. I know, it sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mom, unfazed, decided she wanted lobster, so we went to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us reservations at a hotel in Kennebunkport from New York City while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation with us. During this, my dad called my mom up and my mom excused herself to go and speak with my dad. Apparently all the hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. Height of vacation season in Kennebunkport. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently, the local had been listening into my mom's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I want to say there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was preppy, clean cut, unassuming, and he fit in with the clientele. He told my mom that he had a big house with a nice guest house, and that we were welcome to stay, and that his wife wouldn't mind it at all. Immediately, my reaction was like, forget that. There was no way in the world I was staying in a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. No offense to anybody who lives in Maine, but the streets there do get pretty creepy. My mom, doing her due diligence, determined this guy was pretty legit. So, my mom's an investment banker, and they chatted enough for my mom to determine that he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical, and he told me that I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister, and I got into our car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had two bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle center, try to imagine a symmetrical room layout. They were right underneath the room window, and each room just seemed out of place. Anyway, fast forward a couple of minutes. We were all getting ready to go to bed. My mom hears a knock on the door, and it's the guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got settled. Cool. Nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later, he came back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, thanks, we're good. We'll stop by the house in the morning to say thank you. So let's fast forward the story another 30-45 minutes. I remember that I couldn't sleep and that I felt terrified because I heard rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere near around trees or close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I could see my mom wide awake and looking up at the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife is in the process of redecorating. When I looked up, there was a male figure just standing. I thought I was going to have a complete heart attack. I don't know how long he was there. When he walked away, my mom waited a bit and then told us to get our stuff and let's go. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much freaking out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear about that. My mom said she was going to put the stuff in the car and that we need to follow her out immediately. This was around 2 a.m. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return the key and say thanks and get the heck out of there. However, when we got to the front, all of the lights were off. Not just all lights, but it looked like nobody had been home. Porch light, table lamp in front of windows, everything black. Also, the two cars were gone, the local's car and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom at this point pretty unsettled. She said we were leaving and we proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted, padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev. We were in a big SUV and we just got the heck out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We have never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I remember asking a family member one night about it though, when he was drunk, and all he said was, "They didn't tell you?" The actual owners of that house were on vacation. So, after hearing that, I'm assuming my mom and dad followed up with local authorities and figured that out, but never told us. I don't know who that man was or what was planning that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who were in that area at the time, whether traveling through, etc. This happened 2 or 3 days before Ted Bundy was finally caught. My mother and father had moved to Tallahassee just a few weeks prior, and were living in a so-so area of apartment complexes. My dad was in school at FSU and had a Monday science lab that would let out at unpredictable times. My mom, not yet having yet found a job, was pretty bored most of the day, and would walk to campus on Mondays to try and meet my dad if the timing happened to be right. But this particular day, his lab had let out before she got there, and she didn't see him, so she walked back to their apartment. As she was walking, with no one else in sight, she turned the corner onto the street, where the apartments were on the other side of the road. Just as she did this, a guy in a red-orange Volkswagen Beetle, a pretty rare car, especially in color, was coming down the street toward her and leaned over. A guy leaned over and waved at her in a friendly, excited manner. She only saw him briefly and not from very close, but he was young, dark-haired, and she didn't recognize him. My mother was confused. She and my dad didn't really know anyone else down there, but she gave a small wave and a tepid smile back. They had met another young couple a week before, and for a second she wondered if it was the husband, but then it would be weird for him to wave in such an exaggerated way at someone he only knew a little bit. She suddenly recalled the murders of some college girls from FSU that had happened a couple of months before, and started to feel uncomfortable with the current situation. Wanting to check to see if he was still around without really obviously turning and looking, she realized that if she crossed the street toward her apartment, she could get a good look more naturally. As she did so, she saw the car had stopped just across the intersection she had turned the corner around initially. She could see by the lights that the guy was sitting with his foot in the brakes, and worse, that he had his head tilted up and was blatantly watching her in his rearview mirror. She also knew the particular duplex he was stopped in front of was vacant, so there was no way he was waiting for somebody to come out. My mom was thoroughly freaked out and tried figuring out what to do at that point. There were no cell phones, of course, but my parents didn't even have a landline in their apartment yet. However, there was a nice thick tree ahead a little, and she realized that if she walked behind it, she could then walk at such an angle that the tree would block his line of vision of her for quite a while, and he wouldn't know exactly where she was. So she did just that, and after getting a decent bit further, she peeped around the blocked line of vision, and his car was gone. She figured he realized she was onto him and didn't want to deal with the woman putting up a fight. As I said at the beginning of this story, Ted Bundy was caught just a couple of days later, in an orange Beetle that was stolen 2 blocks from my parents' apartment. He almost always stole Beetles to get around, likely comfortable with them since his own car was the famous beige Beetle. Ted Bundy would apparently often return cars he's stolen after using them to murder people, and my mom thinks that what he was planning to do with her, but he changed his mind, and that's why he was back in that area. Thankfully, my mother was wary and not killed by Ted Bundy, because if that were the case, I wouldn't be alive today. This isn't my own encounter, but my mother's experience from when she was around 19 to 21 years old. If you're not messed up in the head after reading this story, then I honestly don't know what to tell you. She lived in a small unit in Richmond, Melbourne, and worked night shifts at a restaurant. Because she worked nights, she would sleep during the day and wake up around 2 to 3 p.m. She had a friend who visited her place regularly around the time she woke up, and they would eat a meal together and hang out for a couple of hours. This was part of my mom's daily routine. One night, my mom was at the laundromat alone, and she noticed the smallest young European or Middle Eastern macho-looking man unloading a washing machine full of baby clothes. Like, a really freakishly huge amount of baby clothes. To my mom, the whole scene looked out of place. The guy didn't seem right. His demeanor didn't fit the load of baby clothing he was hauling into his basket. The man looked over at my mom and just stared at her. But my mom mentioned that she didn't think much about it at the time. She left shortly after with her load and drove back to her unit. Fast forward a couple of weeks later. My mom finished her shift at work and drove back to her place. Went to bed, woke up the next day, in the afternoon and soon heard a knock at her front door. Assuming it was her friend, she started walking down the hallway where you could see a frosted window at the end. She saw a smallish figure, the exact size as her friend, and didn't have any thought that it could be someone other than who she expected. My mom said that she was halfway down the hallway. Her body suddenly stopped in its tracks and an immediate overwhelming feeling of crippling fear came over her. She was frozen and staring at the shape of a figure outside for a minute, when an unknown voice said something like, "Hey, come open the door, it's me." My mom slowly walked back down the hallway and into her bedroom. She waited in her room for the unknown visitor to leave, but he never did. Every couple minutes he would say things like, "Come on, let me in. I know you're in there. Why don't you open the door?" According to my mom, she waited in her room for maybe 2 hours listening to the stranger calling out to her. She couldn't call anyone because the phone was in her kitchen, and she didn't have the bravery to leave her room, as the unit was tiny and easily accessible. She was afraid the person outside would hear her and find a way to get inside. She mentioned that after waiting long, she couldn't handle the cold temperature of her room. She was barely wearing anything. No, she had only been sleeping beforehand. She finally got the guts to jump up and bolt from her room to the kitchen, which had a back door. She ran out the back door and down the street behind her unit. She had a neighbor who was friends with her, and she went straight to their place. She explained what happened, and they both looked out this person's window, which had a view of my mom's unit since their street was in a U shape. They could see the stranger still standing at the front of my mom's door. It was the same man from the laundromat a few weeks earlier. They called the police, but the man left before anyone could come. After the incident, my mom stayed at her parents' house for a few days. Soon she felt that she was safe to go live in her own unit again. A couple of weeks later, she moved back into her unit. She began receiving notes, letters under her door and on her front steps. According to my mom, the letters had strange things written on them. And no, she never told me what was written, but she did tell me that the sentences and words were extremely immature, as if written by a 6-year-old. Letters were squiggly, written back to front and arranged in strange sequences. My mom would give me the notes into the police station. They weren't treated as much of a threat. This continued for maybe a few weeks for a month. One day, my mom woke up in the afternoon after a previous night shift. It was just another regular day, but she felt that she needed to go and spend a night at her parents' house. She left, spent the night, and got a call the next day to find that the strange man from the house in the first part of the story had returned to her unit around the same time she left. He made his way back to her unit with an axe, and he immediately started axing down her back door like a madman. He was seen by a neighbor who called the police. However, the man left before the police came. It turned out the man's description, partnered with the strange notes my mom was receiving, fit the policeman's belief that the man was a suspect of the rape and murder of a number of girls in Melbourne from the 70s onwards. He was never caught. He's most likely still out there. I also wonder if a few of the men around the ages of 56 and over with pedophilia and murder crimes on the site that I have listed below could possibly be the baby man. And no, I will not be putting a link to the description down to the site below of my video, well, because I have to have permission from the reader. But anyways, thank you guys for listening. Stay safe, stay blessed, and stay classy. See you guys on Monday.